Hey guys, welcome back to Total Tactics FPL. It's Fran here, and I'm back with my Game Week 8 wildcard review. I'm also going to be talking about future transfers that I have in my mind, and also how I plan to address Game Week 12 potentially, where we will have that Arsenal and City blank, and also Liverpool potentially on an upswing when it comes to their fixtures. When I look at my team, though, if I just start with my defense very simply, I'm very happy that I have Cancelo in it. I'm very happy that I have Trippier. Pope and Shaw are probably some question marks, especially after they had a rather off performance, both from the offensive and the defensive end. I would say, given that I didn't go into Isak, it did make sense on paper for me to go to Shaw because I thought the Bournemouth game was great. Once again, to target. It was something that I planned to do anyways with my triple Brighton team before the game was postponed. And so I do think that it was the right decision. Potentially, Dean was someone who, if I wanted to spread my risk around, which is an interesting type of FPL argument, it's the sort of argument where you shouldn't look at your assets in isolation and potentially you should be hedging at times. But I did think independently that Shar was the right pick. He also always takes a lot of shots on target, and you could see that in terms of expected goal involvement. It is markedly very high. I also think that the Everton game in Game Week 12 is still going to be a game where I'm going to be playing triple Newcastle defense because I don't see myself throwing away any transfers anytime soon for Shar or for Trippier or even for Pope. I have the option, of course, to move into someone like Allison in the future, but I can't see myself doing that. I still like Pope and Trippier on most match weeks, even versus United, because I still think that these players have either the potential to have a high haul where Pope makes a lot of saves and fortunately keeps his clean sheet, or Trippier at least, he is that double-edged sword, still very close with a free kick versus Bournemouth. So Cancelo's a keeper as well. And then I'll have Reece James, who's on my bench, to come back in. Another issue is going to be Nico Williams, though, and he might be someone that I can actually address before Game Week 12. Because even though I have to spend some transfers to get out of Arsenal players such as Saka, who I see as someone that I might keep until the Leeds game, there is still going to be potential for me to move someone like Nico Williams into a Wolves defender. And a Wolves defender is interesting because for me, I still think they look defensively very astute. I think they're going to mimic what they did last season in terms of keeping very good, solid performances versus most teams and keeping their clean sheets, unless there's once again, frequent games where you have an Alan Maximin banger versus them. And their lineup of games, now that they've overcome the City fixture, is actually very, very good on paper. I do like Kilman and I also like Johnny to potentially replace Nico Williams, and that could be one of the ideas that I have for my team. As far as the midfield, though, I think I made the right decisions 100% with all the players that I played, other than Andreas. Andreas was a little bit of a shock because Andreas was someone who we expected to be on all set pieces, and now that Willian has joined this Fulham team and actually started as well in the Nottingham Forest game, he took some of the set pieces that we usually attribute to Andreas away from him, and that really does reduce Andreas's value as an asset. The one thing that I suppose we have going forwards is someone like Bailey is still susceptible to rotation and even an early substitution. And whilst Andreas is someone who usually gets subbed off at around 75 to 80 minutes, I just like the fact that he is pretty much nailed on for starts and not too much will change. He still takes some of the corners, but Willian will have his fair share of free kicks. And that is going to affect, I would say, Andreas's value overall. It does mean that he should still be, I would say, a bench option, not someone that we should consistently think about starting week on week. I have Zaha on my bench who had a blank, and I'm looking forward to playing him, even though it's versus Chelsea, and even though there's going to be a mirror matchup there with Reece James. So Reece James will come in, replace Shar, and Zaha will replace Andreas, like for like, and I'll continue to play a 3-4-3. I thought Madison had an exceptional game versus Spurs, and if you get the chance to rewatch the highlights, I think you could have easily argued for that to be a 1 goal, 1 assist, 2 bonus game for Madison, because that was kind of the level he was playing at. Had a great shot on target in the right wing spot, one-on-one versus Lloris, where Lloris made a very, very good save with his feet. And we also saw plenty of chances being created for Patson Daka from Madison. So I really like Madison going forwards, especially since the opponents will ease up a lot more. And you can just see it simply with the Leicester run. I think for defensive transfers too, there is the option of going to someone like a James Justin, but whether they actually shore up their defense is another question because Brendan Rodgers is still in the team, and we're still seeing a lot of individual mistakes that lead to defensive collapses. If you look at, for example, Ndidi's mistake in the Spurs game and how he allowed Bentancur to pretty much run at goal or even potentially assist Kane, then I really have to say that Leicester team just looks incredibly disjointed. And when we look at someone like Martinelli and Saka, yes, these are two players that in Game Week 12 will have a blank, but I still think that they're independently really well priced. And I still like actually most of these midfielders over someone like Trent for the time being. So I don't see the pressing need to move into Trent, especially since he has Arsenal and City. Both are games where, yes, whilst Trent could get some fantastic attacking returns, I don't see him getting clean sheets in those games. And I think that's the kind of level that City and Arsenal are playing at. As far as Martinelli and Saka, a little bit quiet, and I think part of that too is because Brentford play a back five, and playing a back five means that both Martinelli and Saka are stretched out wide. And another thing too is because Kieran Tierney, I would say, is not so offensively adept, sorry, as Zinchenko. It does mean that Martinelli has to hug the sideline a little bit more in that formational structure. Whereas usually when you see Zinchenko play, he does occupy and push up to those left wing positions very comfortably, which means that Martinelli can actually cut inside and make some brilliant runs. Jesus is also starting to drop a little bit less into the midfield, which means that he will continue to hog the box. And I do think that is something to track for the time being to see how that affects someone like Bukayo Saka, because I think I was very, very fortunate actually to get 2 assists from him, if I'm being completely honest. As far as the forwards, a little bit of a mistake to not go with a king captaincy, but I really just think that Haaland is someone that we cannot doubt as a player. Tough game, like Wolves on paper, he still scores, and I still think that there is equally the same potential for him to score going forwards. Even in the Liverpool game, Game Week 12, I don't think the king captaincy is set, especially since this Everton team have actually looked like quite a bit of a defensive juggernaut now that they have Idrissa Gueye back in the team as well. And I'm a little bit worried about the ceiling, I suppose, of that Tottenham team, or at least Kane himself, compared to someone like Haaland, who I would say is just probably going to be a perma captain for the rest of the year. No exceptions other than game week 12. And Mitrovic, yes, he did blank once again, but I think it's different to Andreas, where Andreas, we can clearly see that his ceiling has dropped. Mitrovic, for me, I still think will have plenty of opportunities in the upcoming games since there's such great fixtures for him to do better. And yeah, I'm nothing really against Mitrovic now. You could obviously move into someone like Tony, I suppose, if you're so worried about Mitrovic. But I would say it's probably worth to actually hold off that transfer, have a double, see if I want to play around in immediate transfers for any of the players, given some pressing injuries from the international break, or to address some other concerns that I might have in the future, such as some of my defenders and the triple Newcastle defense that I have. So looking at my team now, I actually have 0.7 in the bank, and for game week 9, I think there aren't many transfers that actually call to me. If we just simply look at how the team would load out, I mean, I'm just going to be playing James, I'll be playing Cancelo, I'll be playing Trippier and Pope, which seems a little bit tough for Fulham. Fulham have looked like a very exciting, at least very aggressive team with great second half swings themselves as a team. So they do have also a deep bench too to call upon, with some players that could create some damage. So Daniel James coming off the bench, etc., etc. I'm very happy to play Saka, Zaha, Madison, and Martinelli. I think the North London derby is going to be a fixture of goals. We saw even Leicester able to score versus that Tottenham defense, and I don't really think the Tottenham defense looked particularly good versus Leicester. I thought Leicester did actually cut them apart many, many times, and part of that too was the brilliance of Madison, but also just a lot of key mistakes from players. So when Perisic was playing right wing back, he made so many defensive mistakes. Yes, he got the corner assist, but defensively, we saw even mistakes from Davinson Sanchez as well. And potentially, yes, of course, you could say Romero is going to vastly improve the look of that Tottenham defense for the North London derby, but still think there's going to be issues there. That this Arsenal team, who look exceptionally well drilled. I mean, they lost Odegaard today, but played Fabio Vieira and looked so good without Odegaard. And I think part of that too is because Partey found himself back into the lineup, which gives Arsenal this defensive solidity to actually build upon. So when we look at the team, I would say Mitrovic, Haaland, and Kane are the only players that I would have originally said last week were non-negotiable for me. However, Mitrovic, I suppose, has an opportunity to be moved into someone like a Tony, but I just don't like the transfer, right? Because if I move Mitrovic to Tony, yes, I get to capitalize immediately on that Bournemouth game, but I've wasted the transfer, and I still have Newcastle, Brighton, and Chelsea, some really tough games in my opinion for Tony to score, regardless of whether they're playing at home. And Mitrovic himself gets that opportunity to play Bournemouth in two game weeks time. West Ham doesn't look particularly good. I think he could easily score versus them. Newcastle at home definitely screams a lot better than Newcastle away for Tony. So I can see myself keeping Mitrovic. I did mention that Andreas doesn't look exceptionally hot, but Bailey, unfortunately, with a 66-minute substitution, is also something that I'm not keen to move into. And therefore, the only transfer seems to really be screaming at me is going to be a move away from Neco Williams. But I once again can't see the point of doing that. I'd rather actually save the transfer and maybe think about moving away from Saka when he plays versus Liverpool. That's an opportunity to actually move into Trent, even though, yes, I am going to be, I suppose, backing Trent over the City fixture and getting Cancelo as well. That doesn't seem the most sexiest transfer, but it could work out just for team structure, because I might want to move into a 4-3-3 that incorporates using Trent more so than some of these 8.0 attackers, although Madison on his run, Zaha on his run, even Saka versus Leeds is something that I would be missing out on if I move a little bit too soon into Trent. So I would probably think about making some side grades and then maybe taking a hit around game weeks 12 or 13 to capitalize on going back into those Liverpool assets and hoping that the upside that I get in the immediate term is going to do well for me. When I compare my team as well to some game week 9 wildcarders, I think the only difference is going to be something like a Tony, and even of course that midfield premium. But I do think Kane still matches very well on that trajectory, especially since he has that Everton game on 11. And that's pretty much my immediate thoughts so far. I could move off of Shar as well if I move into Trent in the near future, but it does feel like a little bit of a cap because you're basically asking Trent to play some of the toughest games he's going to have all season and forcing a transfer that way. So I don't really like those moves so far. So a roll for me is on the plans this week. So let's just quickly move into the price rises and falls and some transfer trends as well, just to kind of discuss them, since a lot of people will be on different trajectories, I suppose, with game week 8/9 wildcarders and people who are even holding up until 13. I would say in terms of immediate transfers, I don't really like Isak that much. Saliba as well, because the fixtures aren't very, very good for Saliba. And with Isak, I think him losing penalties and not looking very good in open play versus Bournemouth is going to affect him, because Callum Wilson returning back to the lineup should affect how, I would say, imperious he could be as an asset. Trippier is definitely someone to keep. Madison's fantastic. I really think he has to be a transfer that everyone considers very, very quickly because he had such a great game for Spurs, and the fixtures have only eased up for him, regardless of what you think about Brendan Rodgers as a manager. The other assets here that call out to me are Zaha and Dyer. I think they're both quite interesting. Dyer, of course, heads into a sea of tough fixtures, but I do think, let's say after that United game for game week 12, he could definitely be one of those nailed options because he doesn't give you that sort of low floor, high ceiling problems that Perisic does, because Perisic can give you 1 minute per game, 1 point per game, because he could also be subbed off at 50, or he could give you 11 points. But with Dyer, at least you have some consistency, and also the fact that he is quite a dominating force in set pieces, and I think he should be benefiting more from how good the Spurs team are at delivering these set pieces from both Perisic and Son. Going forwards, though, into the second page, Pope is an interesting one. I don't really think he necessarily deserves another price rise. I do think that Newcastle defense looked a little bit worse than we had actually projected, and it's not necessarily because Bournemouth looked exceptional on the day. I think Newcastle showed some midfield struggles as well. And then Tony is definitely, I would say, more worthy of a price rise. If I had to compare Tony and Isak as options on Game Week 9, 100% I'd be backing Tony with that Bournemouth fixture and just the added benefit of how good his free kicks look and how good the added value of being a penalty taker is for an asset. With Son, it's such a tricky situation because there are three or four midfield premiums in the game that are all interesting to go into. But is Son necessarily better than Salah, better than Sterling, better than De Bruyne, even who have all arguably been performing at similar levels? I'd probably actually say no. I don't think Son's a pressing transfer. I think the Arsenal game is going to be a tough one. He's always scored quite well in North London derbies, but it doesn't mean it's going to be a great option. And then if we move into the last page, Jesus having a fall, Robertson having a fall, Salah having a fall is quite interesting. No one too interesting, I suppose, in other aspects other than Cucurella. I would actually say that Jesus is an interesting one because I think he still looked like the most interesting Arsenal asset to own on this day versus Brentford. Martinelli and Saka didn't particularly have the most interesting offensive games, but they still had good shots on goal. I thought Raya had fantastic saves as well. Jesus really could have had a hat trick in this game. He still looks like the asset to own from Arsenal if you're going to double up in Arsenal. I would say Jesus is probably actually still better than someone like a Mitrovic or Tony, in my personal opinion. But it's just that blank that really has colored people's opinions on Arsenal, and that's exactly why I guess Jesus will fall. I do think that after 12, though, he's going to be that asset that we're immediately looking to get into. And it calls, or I guess it asks the question of how we plan to spend our money in FPL, because once that fixture happens, and if a lot of us have moved into Trent, we might have closed the option to go into Jesus, which I think could be a huge mistake. As far as the Salah, I still really don't think he's justified enough to be the most expensive asset in our team, especially now that Haaland exists. And I really think it might even make sense to actually spread the funds in your team. Go for someone like Sterling, who could be just as interesting as a De Bruyne or a Son, and just move forwards with that sort of structure. I think that's something that people haven't really tapped into, but on a game week 9 wildcard, now that Chelsea don't have a blank, I really think that could be the ace in people's sleeves. If we move on to discussing the transfer trends, I really think that in the forward positions that Isak really isn't the interesting option. I think Tony is much better. Moving out of Jesus makes sense because I imagine a lot of people are moving out of their game week 8 setups and looking towards a wild card, or at least trying to address the situation of the blank for Arsenal. So that makes a lot of sense. Looking at the transfer trends for the midfielders, equally, I would say Salah is someone who probably doesn't warrant as much money in our teams, and we should definitely spread our budgets. I really think that since De Bruyne is performing at such a world-class level, it's such an easy target to actually find assists towards in Haaland, and with even, let's say, Son starting to show some signs of form, and Sterling, who was already consistently, I would say, ticked along very, very nicely, there really is a reason to move away from Salah, and I don't think he deserves a permanent spot in our teams for his previous season's performance, especially now that all the other midfield assets are performing at a very similar level. And I think it does make sense that we're seeing moves away from Salah. And lastly, I think with the defenders, you're seeing a lot of movement from Perisic, away from Perisic rather, and away from Trent. But moving into Saliba is, I would say, more of a casual move for now. We definitely have to address the situation of the game week 12 blank. And I don't think Saliba is the right transfer to make for now. I think definitely 13 and beyond, he's an exceptional asset and definitely someone that we should be booking a transfer, I would say, in the future to getting back into our teams, because he's much better than, I would say, someone like a Ramsdale. And even over Gabriel, much more confident in him as a player, and he's just cheaper simply. So definitely a lot of upside there with Saliba. And then when we look at, let's say, people moving into Trippier and Cancelo, it makes a lot of sense, because I think a casual move very, very early on was to immediately assume Zinchenko into our teams. Moving into Dalot, I'm not a huge fan of, but definitely Patterson could be interesting, because we're already seeing that this Everton team is starting to play very, very defensive football, and they could end up being another Wolves of the last season. And that's kind of my thoughts for the trends for this week. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.